Warning, this story contains intense heartbreak, betrayal, and the kind of payback that's served ice cold. It started with a speeding ticket, a routine annoyance that somehow unraveled my entire 15-year marriage. The officer who handed it to me with a smug grin was the same man I later discovered my wife was meeting in cheap motel rooms. The betrayal wasn't just a knife in the back, it was a slow, deliberate twist from two people I was supposed to trust, one who shared my bed and one who swore to uphold the law. My first instinct was pure, unfiltered rage. But then a colder, more calculated thought took its place. They thought I was a fool. They thought they were clever. You think you know how this ends? A messy divorce, a screaming match, think again. What I uncovered next and what I did with that knowledge changed everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever faced a betrayal that left you breathless? What's your ultimate revenge fantasy or your path to healing? Let's share our stories. Part 1, The Scent of a Lie. It was a Tuesday, the kind of soul-crushingly mundane Tuesday that defined my life as a 47-year-old suburban dad. I managed a team of software developers, a job that paid the mortgage on our comfortable, if slightly boring, four-bedroom colonial. My life was a steady rhythm of deadlines, lawn maintenance, and the quiet, simmering contentment of a long-term marriage, or so I thought. The first thread in the tapestry of my comfortable life came loose a month ago, on a sun-drenched afternoon. I was late for a dental appointment, my mind a chaotic swirl of quarterly reports and the nagging reminder that I'd forgotten to take out the recycling. I pressed a little too hard on the accelerator of my sensible sedan, and a flash of red and blue lights filled my rearview mirror. Officer Miller. His name was stitched in neat blue thread above the pocket of his crisp uniform. He had that uniquely American law enforcement swagger, a mix of boredom and absolute authority. He was probably in his late 30s, with a jawline you could sharpen a pencil on and eyes that scanned my car's interior with casual disdain. "License and registration, sir." I handed them over, my heart thumping with the low-grade anxiety of being pulled over. He scribbled on his pad, the silence stretching into an uncomfortable eternity. "Gonna write you a ticket for that, Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice flat. 15 over, you know better." I wanted to argue, to explain the dental appointment, the stress, but I just nodded. "Yes, officer, my mistake." He handed me the slip of paper, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. There was a faint, cloying scent on his wrist, sandalwood and something else, something sweet and floral. It was oddly familiar, but I couldn't place it. He gave me a final, unsmiling look and walked back to his cruiser. I drove away, fuming at the $150 fine, the scent already fading from my mind. That evening, my wife Claire came home late from her book club. She swept into the kitchen, smelling of wine and an expensive perfume I hadn't bought her. It was a heady, exotic scent, sandalwood and a sweet, floral note I couldn't quite identify. "Sorry I'm late, honey," she said, kissing me on the cheek. Her lips were cold. Brenda got into a long rant about the protagonist's moral failings. "You know how she gets." I nodded, my attention half on the spaghetti sauce I was stirring. "No worries, how was it?" "Fine." "Boring, really." She drifted out of the room and the scent lingered. It was the same one, the exact same one from Officer Miller's wrist. My logical mind, the part that debugged code for a living, immediately tried to find a rational explanation. It's a popular perfume, a coincidence. Maybe the officer's wife and my wife shop at the same department store. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, began to germinate in the dark, fertile soil of my subconscious. The signs started small after that, almost imperceptible. Claire, who had always been an open book, suddenly became fiercely protective of her phone. She'd angle it away from me when she texted, a subtle but deliberate movement. She started going to the gym more often, buying new lingerie that I never saw, and her book club meetings seemed to be happening twice a week now. When I'd ask questions, her answers were vague, delivered with a hint of irritation, as if I were interrogating her. "Just blowing off steam, Mark," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You should try it sometime." "You're always so wound up." She wasn't wrong, I was wound up. Our intimacy had dwindled to a perfunctory peck on the cheek before bed. Our conversations had become a sterile exchange of logistical information. who was picking up our daughter, Lily, from soccer practice, what bills needed to be paid. I'd attributed it to the natural erosion of time, the slow, grinding process that turns passionate lovers into comfortable roommates. I told myself this was normal. All marriages hit a plateau, but the coincidences kept piling up. A few weeks after the ticket, I was driving home when I saw Officer Miller's cruiser parked 2 streets over from our house. He was just sitting there, watching the traffic. It was an odd place for a speed trap. I saw him there again the following week. My mind started connecting dots that I desperately didn't want to connect. The perfume, the secretive texts, the sudden, inexplicable distance. I felt like a man walking through his own home in the dark, sensing that the furniture had been rearranged, but unable to prove it. The familiar contours of my life were shifting, and I kept bumping into the sharp, painful edges of a truth I wasn't ready to face. The worst part was the self-doubt. Was I going crazy? Was I a jealous, paranoid husband looking for problems that didn't exist? I loved Claire. I had built my entire adult life around her. The idea that she could betray me was so monumental, so foundation-shattering, that my mind instinctively recoiled from it. It was easier to believe I was the one who was flawed. Part 2, the digital footprints. The dam of my denial finally broke on a Saturday morning. Claire was at her sister's for the weekend, a last-minute trip she'd announced with a suspicious level of excitement. Lily was at a sleepover. The house was unnervingly quiet, the silence amplifying the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. We had a shared family iPad, a device mostly used by Lily for games and by me for reading the news. Claire rarely touched it, preferring the privacy of her phone. But that morning, as I sat at the kitchen island nursing a cup of coffee, a notification pinged on the iPad screen. It was a message preview from a contact named David M. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. My blood ran cold. David M. My mind raced. David Miller, the cop it had to be. With trembling hands, I unlocked the iPad. I had never invaded Claire's privacy before. It felt like a sacred line I was about to cross, a Rubicon from which there was no return. But I had to know. Her iMessage account was still linked. I opened the app and my world tilted on its axis. There it was, months of messages. Not just flirtatious banter, but a detailed, explicit chronicle of an affair. They had nicknames for each other. They talked about my long work hours, my predictable nature, my fading romantic gestures. They described their clandestine meetings in excruciating detail, critiquing my performance as a husband while planning their next tryst. The cop, David, was arrogant and crude, his messages filled with cheap compliments and thinly veiled promises. Claire, my intelligent, sophisticated Claire, responded with the breathless enthusiasm of a teenager. She talked about feeling alive and seen for the first time in years. Each word was a fresh stab wound. She wasn't just cheating, she was rewriting our entire history, painting me as a neglectful, passionless warden from whom she needed to escape. I scrolled back, my vision blurring with tears of rage and humiliation. I found the messages from the day he gave me the ticket. David M. just pulled over your husband. LOL, he looks so pathetic. Claire, oh my God, you did. Is he suspicious? David M., not a clue. Just sat there and took it like a good little boy. It was kind of hot seeing you get off on it. Claire, you're terrible. I love it. The breath hitched in my throat. They had laughed about it. The ticket wasn't a random event. It was a power play, a private joke at my expense. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, acrid bile that rose in my throat. The scent of her perfume wasn't a coincidence. It was a flagrant clue they dangled right under my nose, confident in my ignorance. I sat there for hours, the coffee growing cold, scrolling through the evidence of my own obsolescence. There were photos, selfies of them in a dimly lit room I recognized as the generic decor of a cheap motel just off the highway. In one, he was wearing his uniform, the badge glinting in the low light. They were reckless, arrogant, and utterly convinced of their own cleverness. The discovery wasn't a single gut punch, it was a slow, methodical beating. Every message, every picture was another blow. This wasn't a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, long-term deception. Claire hadn't just stepped outside our marriage, she had built a second life on the ruins of my trust. And she had enlisted a man who represented law and order to help her break every rule that had once defined our world. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Part 3. The anatomy of a breakdown. The rest of that weekend passed in a surreal, hazy fog. I wandered through the empty rooms of my house, a ghost in my own life. Every object was a monument to a lie. The framed wedding photo on the mantelpiece, with our impossibly young and hopeful faces, was a cruel joke. The bed we shared felt like a crime scene. I touched the indentation on her pillow, imagining her lying there, texting him while I slept beside her, oblivious. My first impulse was to smash things. I picked up a ceramic vase she loved, my hand trembling with the desire to hurl it against the wall, to create an external chaos that matched the storm inside me. But I didn't. Instead, a chilling, unnatural calm settled over me. Rage is a hot, explosive emotion. This was something different. It was cold, heavy, and infinitely more dangerous. I replayed our entire marriage in my head, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. Were there clues I'd missed? I remembered the times she'd seemed distant, the anniversaries I'd half-assed with a generic gift card, the conversations where I'd been more focused on my phone than on her. I had taken her for granted. I had become complacent. The guilt was a suffocating blanket. Was this my fault? Had I driven her to this? Then I'd remember the messages, the casual cruelty, the laughter at my expense, and the guilt would evaporate, replaced by a crystalline, righteous anger. She hadn't come to me to talk. She hadn't suggested counseling. She had chosen deceit. She had chosen to humiliate me with a man who represented the very system I was expected to respect. I thought about our daughter, Lily. She was 14, a bright, sensitive girl who adored her mother. The thought of telling her, of shattering her innocent world and forcing her to choose sides, was an agony I couldn't bear. But how could I not? How could I continue this charade, this hollow performance of a happy family? In the depths of my despair, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through old photo albums, tracing the arc of our life together. There we were, backpacking through Europe after college, young and broke but deliriously happy. There we were, bringing a newborn Lily home from the hospital, my arm wrapped protectively around Claire, a look of pure awe on my face. These were not lies. The love had been real, hadn't it? The juxtaposition of those memories with the sordid text on the iPad created a profound cognitive dissonance. It felt like two different women inhabited the same body. The Claire I loved, the partner who had held my hand through my father's funeral, and the Claire who mocked me with her lover, were impossible to reconcile. By the time Sunday evening rolled around and Claire was due home, I was a wreck. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't slept, I had debated 100 different scenarios. Should I confront her the moment she walked through the door? Should I pack a bag and just leave? Or should I play dumb, gather more evidence, and plan my revenge? The word revenge tasted strange and unfamiliar in my mouth. I wasn't a vengeful person. I was a software manager, a man who believed in logic, order, and fixing bugs. But this wasn't a bug. This was a catastrophic system failure, and a simple reboot wasn't going to fix it. When she finally walked in, all smiles and breezy chatter about her weekend, it took every ounce of my self-control not to scream. She kissed my cheek, and the scent of that goddamn perfume filled my nostrils. "I missed you," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of sincerity. I looked into her eyes, the eyes I had trusted for 15 years, and saw nothing but a stranger. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would not give her the satisfaction of a screaming match. I would not let her see my pain. I would smile, I would nod, and I would play the part of the oblivious, devoted husband. But behind the curtain, I would become someone else entirely. I would become an architect, and I was going to design their downfall. Part 4. The Unraveling of Officer Miller. The next morning, the fog of grief had lifted, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My new purpose was simple, to gather irrefutable proof, not just for a divorce attorney, but for myself. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal, and I needed to ensure that when the time came, they would have nowhere to hide. My first target was Officer David Miller. I started with a simple Google search. It didn't take long to find his digital footprint. He was a member of the local police force, with a commendation for a minor drug bust 2 years ago proudly displayed on the town's website. He was married. A quick search on Facebook brought up his wife's profile, Sarah Miller. It was public. Her page was a shrine to domestic bliss, photos of their two young children, saccharine posts about her hero husband, and check-ins at family-friendly restaurants. She looked like a sweet, unsuspecting woman. A wave of sympathy washed over me. She was a victim in this too, and she deserved to know the truth, but not yet. My tech skills, honed over 2 decades of professional problem-solving, became my greatest weapon. I installed a keylogger on the family iPad, a simple piece of software that would capture every keystroke. I knew Claire occasionally used it to check her email when her phone was charging. It felt sleazy, a gross violation of privacy, but the rules had changed. She had set the new terms of engagement. Next, I bought a small GPS tracking device, the kind parents use for teenage drivers. One evening, while Claire was in the shower, her voice a cheerful, off-key melody that grated on my nerves, I slipped out to the garage. Her car was a mid-sized SUV, a symbol of her suburban life. I placed the magnetic tracker deep within the rear wheel well, my hands shaking slightly. This was the point of no return. I was no longer the wronged husband. I was an active participant in a game of espionage. The data started coming in almost immediately. Twice a week, like clockwork, her car would travel to the Starlight Motel, a seedy, pay-by-the-hour establishment on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where discretion was the main amenity. She would stay for exactly 90 minutes before driving to a nearby Starbucks, presumably to establish her alibi before heading home. One Tuesday, I decided I needed to see it for myself. I called in sick to work, a knot of dread and adrenaline tightening in my stomach. I parked across the street from the motel, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched as her SUV pulled into the parking lot. A few minutes later, a familiar police cruiser pulled in beside her. David Miller got out, not in his uniform, but in jeans and a t-shirt. He glanced around furtively before knocking on the door of room 12. The door opened and he disappeared inside. Seeing it with my own eyes was different from reading about it. It made it real, tangible, and infinitely more painful. I sat in my car, the engine off, and watched the door to room 12. I felt a bizarre mix of emotions, a deep, soul-crushing sadness, a white-hot fury, and a strange, almost clinical detachment. I was an observer, a scientist studying the creatures who had ruined his life. An hour later, I saw something that made my blood boil. Miller came out of the room, got into his cruiser, and drove it to a secluded corner of the parking lot. He then got back out and returned to the room. He was using a police vehicle for his affair. He was conducting his sordid business on the taxpayer's dime. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. That was the peace I needed. This was no longer just a personal betrayal. This was a professional one. He wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was violating the code of conduct of his department. I took out my phone, and with a steady hand, I started recording. I filmed the police cruiser parked in the motel lot. I filmed him leaving the room later, kissing Claire goodbye at the door. I filmed her driving away in her SUV. The footage was grainy, taken from a distance, but it was undeniable. The officer, the cruiser, the motel, the cheating wife, it was all there. As I drove home, a new plan began to form in my mind, far more ambitious and devastating than a simple confrontation. Claire's betrayal was a personal wound. But David Miller's, his was a public trust, and he had shattered it. I wasn't just going to expose an affair, I was going to dismantle a career. Part 5, The Architect of Ruin. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Mark Hayes, dedicated software manager and dependable husband. I made dinner, helped Lily with her homework, and listened to Claire's banal stories about her day, all with a serene, manufactured smile on my face. My calm demeanor seemed to unnerve her. She kept asking if I was okay, if I was feeling stressed at work. Never better, I'd say, looking her straight in the eye, just feeling clear-headed. By night, I was a different person. I became a meticulous researcher, a digital phantom gathering ammunition. I compiled a dossier on Officer David Miller that would have made a private investigator proud. I used the keylogger to get the password to Claire's email account, which she had foolishly used on the iPad. Inside, I found a treasure trove. E-receipts from the Starlight Motel, paid for with a credit card I didn't know she had. Emails between her and David, far more incriminating than the texts, where they discussed their future, my impending irrelevance, and even joked about his wife, Sarah. The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Miller had a small, private Instagram account. Claire followed him. From her account, I could see his posts. Most were benign photos of his kids, but one, from a month ago, was a picture of his police cruiser's dashboard computer. He was complaining about a long shift, but in the reflection on the screen, you could just make out the interior of a motel room. Room 12 of the Starlight Motel. He had taken the picture while on duty, inside the room with my wife. He was so arrogant, so sure of his own impunity, that he documented his own misconduct. I now had a complete, multi-pronged arsenal, screenshots of every text and email detailing the affair from its inception. GPS data logging dozens of trips to the Starlight Motel, date-stamped video and photographic evidence of his police cruiser at the motel during their trysts, credit card receipts confirming the room rentals. His own social media post placing him on duty in his vehicle inside the motel room. I laid it all out one night on my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the digital wreckage of my marriage. The question was no longer what to do, but how. A direct confrontation felt too simple, too unsatisfying. They deserved more than a shouting match. They deserved a public reckoning. They had built their illicit world in the shadows, and I was going to drag it, kicking and screaming, into the brightest, most unforgiving light. My plan had two phases. Phase 1 was for Miller. Phase 2 was for Claire. I created an anonymous email address. I meticulously compiled the evidence against Miller into a single, password-protected PDF file. The file was a cold, factual narrative of his professional misconduct, supported by irrefutable proof. I wrote a short, professional cover letter addressed to the chief of police, the head of internal affairs, and the mayor of our town. The letter began, "To whom it may concern. It has come to my attention that Officer David Miller has been engaging in conduct unbecoming of an officer, including the use of department property for illicit personal activities during his hours of duty. The attached file contains documented evidence to support this claim. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't mention my name. I framed it solely as a concerned citizen reporting police misconduct. Let them discover the sordid details for themselves. His humiliation would be professional, clinical, and complete. The night before I sent it, I hesitated. Was this too much? Was I about to ruin a man's life, and by extension, the lives of his wife and children? The thought of Sarah and her kids gave me pause. Then I remembered his text message. He looked so pathetic. I remembered the laughter. My hesitation vanished. He had shown me no mercy. I would show him none. With a final, decisive click, I sent the email. The first domino had fallen. Part 6, the detonation. The fallout was faster and more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. 2 days after I sent the email, I saw a local news van parked outside the police station on my way to work. By lunchtime, the story had broken online. Local police officer suspended pending internal affairs investigation. The article was vague, citing serious allegations of misconduct, but I knew the fuse had been lit. That evening, Claire was a nervous wreck. She was glued to her phone, her face pale. "Can you believe this?" she said, showing me the article. "Some cop in our town is in huge trouble. They're saying he was using his cruiser for, well, they're not saying what." I feigned mild interest. "Wow, crazy. I wonder what he did." "I know, right?" she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice was tight with anxiety. "People are just awful." The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a knife. Over the next few days, I watched her unravel. David was obviously not answering her texts or calls. She was jumpy, irritable, and constantly checking the local news website for updates. The investigation was swift. With the evidence I had provided, they had little choice. They likely pulled the GPS data from his cruiser, which would have corroborated everything. A week later, the second shoe dropped. The local paper ran a front-page story. Officer Miller resigns amid scandal. This time they had more details, leaked from an anonymous source inside the department. The story mentioned inappropriate use of a police vehicle at a local motel and a relationship with a currently unnamed local woman. The town was buzzing. Social media was a firestorm of speculation. Who was the mystery woman? The comment sections were a brutal mix of gossip and moral outrage. That was the day Sarah Miller, David's wife, posted on her Facebook page. Her profile picture had been changed to a simple black square. Her post was short and heartbreaking. "To all my friends and family, thank you for your support during this incredibly difficult time. As many of you now know, my husband has betrayed my trust and the trust of this community. My children and I are asking for privacy as we begin the process of healing. The anonymous email had worked perfectly. I had exposed him without ever revealing my own identity, letting the system he was a part of devour him whole. His career was over, his marriage was over, his public reputation was in tatters, phase one was complete. Now it was time for Claire. I waited until that evening. Lily was at a friend's house for a movie night. I asked Claire to sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had first read those fateful messages. "We need to talk," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a fear she could no longer conceal. "About what? Is this about that cop story? It's just so awful, isn't it?" I didn't say a word. I simply slid the iPad across the table, opened to the message thread between her and David M. Her face went from pale to ashen. The color drained away as if a plug had been pulled. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. "Mark, I can explain," she finally stammered, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Can you?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but with an edge of cold steel I didn't know I possessed. "Can you explain the Starlight Motel? Can you explain laughing about the speeding ticket he gave me? Can you explain the photos, or how you called me pathetic to the man you were sleeping with?" Tears welled in her eyes. The desperate, manipulative tears of someone who has been caught. "It wasn't like that. You don't understand. I was lonely. You were never here, always working." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Do not try to make this my fault. You made a choice. You made hundreds of choices. You chose to lie, to cheat, and to humiliate me. You chose him over me, over Lily, over our entire life together." I stood up and walked to my study. I came back with a stack of papers. "These are divorce papers. I've already spoken to an attorney. I want you out of this house by the end of the weekend." She broke down completely then, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Mark, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Think of Lily." "I am thinking of Lily," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm thinking about what kind of example I want to set for her. And it's not this. It's not living a lie. It's not staying with someone who has no respect for me or for the vows we made." The fight went out of her. She just sat there, defeated, the architect of her own misery. She had thought she was so clever, so sophisticated, but in the end, her lies had been cheap and her choices had been ruinous. She had gambled with our family, and she had lost everything. The confrontation wasn't the explosive, screaming match I had once imagined. It was quiet, methodical, and utterly devastating. It was a demolition. And as I stood there looking at the wreckage of the woman I once loved, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt empty. The revenge was complete, but the victory was hollow. Part 7, The Dawn of a New Day. The aftermath was messy, as all divorces are. Claire moved out that weekend, her departure a quiet, somber affair. Telling Lily was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I sat her down and explained, as gently as I could, that Mom and Dad wouldn't be living together anymore. I told her it wasn't her fault, and that we both loved her more than anything in the world. I didn't give her the sordid details. She was old enough to understand the concept of betrayal, but too young to carry the weight of her mother's specific transgressions. For now, it was enough for her to know that her world had irrevocably changed. The first few months were a blur of legal meetings and lonely nights in a house that felt cavernously empty. There were moments when I questioned my decisions. Late at night, the silence would press in, and I would wonder if I could have forgiven her. Could we have salvaged something from the wreckage? In those moments of doubt, I would think back to the texts, to their laughter at my expense. Forgiveness is a noble path, but some betrayals are so profound they poison the very soil of a relationship, making it impossible for anything new to grow. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a new life. Lily and I found a new rhythm, a new version of family. We had movie nights on Fridays, cooked elaborate Sunday breakfasts together, and talked more than we had in years. Without the tension and unspoken resentments that had filled our home, there was space for us to truly connect. I saw my daughter not just as a child to be cared for, but as a funny, intelligent, and resilient young woman. I was no longer just the provider. I was her rock, her confidant, her primary parent. And in that role, I found a purpose that had been missing for a long time. I never saw David Miller again, but I heard through the grapevine that he and his wife divorced. He moved out of state, a disgraced man who had lost his family and his career in a spectacular implosion of his own making. Sometimes I felt a flicker of pity for him and for his children, but then I remembered his arrogance, his casual cruelty, and the pity would fade. He was a man who had abused his power, both in his uniform and in his personal life. He had earned his downfall. As for me, I learned to be alone again. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, hiking, reading history, working on my old project car in the garage. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. I found a quiet satisfaction in my own company, a sense of self-reliance I hadn't realized I'd lost. One day, about a year after the divorce, I was at a local coffee shop when I bumped into a woman from my yoga class. Her name was Anna. We started talking and the conversation was easy, natural, and refreshingly honest. We went out for dinner the next week. There were no games, no pretense. We talked about our pasts, our failures, and our hopes for the future. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was something better. It was slow and steady and built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. My story isn't a simple tale of revenge. The satisfaction of watching their worlds crumble was fleeting. It didn't heal the wound of betrayal or erase the pain. The real victory wasn't in their destruction, but in my own reconstruction. It was in surviving the storm and discovering that I was strong enough to build a new life on the other side. I had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not bitter and broken, but stronger, wiser, and for the first time in a very long time, genuinely happy. I had lost a wife, but I had found myself. And that was a trade I would make every single time. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the slow burn of justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and the messy truth of human relationships. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Forgive or revenge? Was my path the right one? Tag a friend who needs to hear this story. And if a particular moment resonated with you, clip your favorite part and share it. Check out my next post for another twisted saga you won't want to miss.